So
So it's not warping space-time.
it's a warp in space-time, yeah, but that's described in Einstein's general version of it.
Yeah.
Eric Davis è un fisico americano e ha attirato grande attenzione 3 anni fa a causa di voci risultate recentemente corrette, riguardo ad un documento da lui redatto, il cosiddetto Wilson Memo. Questo documento riporta una conversazione avvenuta nel 2022 tra Davis e l'ammiraglio Thomas Wilson, ex direttore dell'intelligence del Pentagono, la DIA. Nel memo, Wilson riferisce che nel 1997, durante un'indagine interna, scoprì l'esistenza di un programma altamente classificato, dedicato al recupero e alla retroingegneria di veicoli non umani. Nonostante il suo alto grado e la posizione ricoperta, Wilson si vede negare l'accesso al programma. Secondo quanto riportato, fu profondamente contrariato dal fatto che un'iniziativa di tale portata potesse operare al di fuori del controllo delle autorità governative ufficiali. Eric Davis è uno scienziato rispettato, noto per mantenere un basso profilo mediatico. Raramente ha concesso interviste e per questo motivo la sua recente partecipazione ad un'audizione pubblica, molto attesa e convocata poche settimane fa, ha suscitato grande interesse. Purtroppo la qualità audio del video originale è estremamente scarsa e ci sono volute settimane di lavoro per analizzarne il contenuto e migliorarne la comprensione. Nonostante gli sforzi, buona parte delle sue dichiarazioni resta difficilmente comprensibile. Da anni si discute spesso in modo frammentario della fisica alla base del volo degli UFO. Le dichiarazioni di Davis rappresentano oggi, maggio 2025, la sintesi più autorevole e articolata di quanto sia emerso fino ad oggi su questo argomento. Sebbene in alcuni passaggi si tratti di contenuti molto tecnici, gli scienziati e gli scettici professionisti troveranno sicuramente spunti di grande interesse. Alla fine dell'intervento di Eric Davis abbiamo incluso altri estratti da una recentissima intervista al giornalista investigativo Ross Coulthard, che aggiunge ulteriori dettagli sugli UFO ricevuti da testimoni diretti nel corso delle sue inchieste.
And third, last but not least, is Dr. Eric Davis, not only a colleague but a friend, and in some cases even a mentor. He is a theoretical and applied physicist, senior science advisor at Earthtech, former researcher at the Aerospace Corporation, and now those are just some of those. So let me tell you who he really is. Dr. Eric Davis was one of our senior scientists during my tenure at ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace and Threat Identification Program, and OSAT as well. He was one of our chief scientists, and by the way, he was also part of other legacy efforts before that, working with elements of the U.S. government. And I think what you're going to find him have to say today is going to be very, very compelling. He's an honorable man. He has served his country time and time again, in some cases at great personal expense, professional and personally to himself. And probably one of the smartest individuals I've ever had the honor and privilege to meet in my life and work with. If you get a chance, I'd shake his hand because I would consider him, like the rest of these gentlemen, a national treasure.
Now, Enrico Fermi in 1950 had lunch at Los Alamos, and in his Italian accent, he asked, "Where is everybody?" And that's a question that every lonely person asks. And what you tell a lonely person is, don't be presumptuous. Your partner will not come to you. You're not that attractive. You have to go to dating sites. And Enrico Fermi didn't even build a telescope to look out. Didn't have cameras to check. And so saying, "Where is everybody?" is arrogant. And many of my colleagues in academia argue, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you read the news, you would conclude that we are not extraordinary, there is room for improvement. And imagining something like us on a planet that has similar conditions to Earth is not an extraordinary claim. It's just an ordinary claim to say under similar circumstances, you will get life and eventually intelligent life. And most stars in the Milky Way galaxy, 100 billion of them, formed billions of years before the sun. So we are late for the party. They may have been before us. So it's an ordinary claim that requires ordinary evidence. when people make this statement, they also imply that we should not invest any funds in searching for them. And without seeking evidence, how can we find them? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So my point is that within the scientific community, innovation is suppressed by people who assume the answer in advance. When I was a kid, I was most frustrated by the adults in the room because I would ask them a question and they would pretend to know the answer. And the one reason I became a scientist is because I don't care what other people say. I don't care how many likes I get. I just want to figure out the answer based on evidence. That's the way a detective works. We shouldn't assume anything. But if we don't collect data, we will never find anything new.
And furthermore, I know has had involvement in the UAP program, specifically from a crash retrieval perspective. Now, maybe mindful here, Dr. Davis, please be careful of security classification, but do you mind sharing, to the degree you're comfortable with, your involvement with information related to crash retrievals and your experience?
Sure.
No, good call.
Thank you. I'm an astrophysicist and also what Mark Jones at NASA and I call a breakthrough propulsion physicist. We worked at breakthrough propulsion together from 1996 to 2002, and then we continued after that to develop a book that we published through the AIAA Press in 2009, Frontiers of Propulsion Science. So my background is in advanced deep space and interstellar spaceflight, mostly fast light propulsion through the use of general relativity theory and quantum field theory, as well as advanced nuclear propulsion like nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. And beamed energy propulsion, which I worked on as a principal investigator for the Air Force Research Lab at Edwards Air Force Base. So I've got quite a broad background. And I began my work in UFOs or UAP starting in 1996. Robert Bigelow hired me to work for him as his director of aerospace physics and astrophysics at the National Institute for Discovery Science. And that was a pretty transformative job for me because as a physical scientist, I'm seeing for the first time odd phenomena. I'm investigating it using forensic science techniques in the field, interviewing witnesses, collecting data. And I have a team of colleagues on the staff that I work with, also PhDs. And we have a world-class science advisory board, which my former boss in Austin helped put off. Was on the board of directors, was on that science advisory board, and was the last chairman of that board, actually. We also had Apollo 14 astronaut Ed Mitchell, and for a short time, Apollo 17 astronaut Jack Schmidt. And we had many academicians and former CIA, national intelligence officers, social psychologists, medical doctors, and nuclear engineers, and the list goes on. We had chalkboarding primarily as well. So it was a really transformative because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I became familiar with Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan and Strong Report and Page co-authored a book called UFOs, A Scientific Debate, which was published by the AAAS Press. The AAAS is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and Science is their prestigious journal that they publish. And so that was a prestigious publication. Every chapter was authored by experts in the field in academia who have studied UFOs and some angle of it from a scientific data standpoint. Data that was collected, data that was analyzed, and so they presented it and published a book. For a bizarre reason, in the 1980s, Carl Sagan had this wonderful astronomy show called Cosmos, and we companion book for that. And what's ironic is that he changed 180 degrees. He all of a sudden went from being UFOs we have in this book that I co-authored or co-edited with Thornton Page, all of this wonderful data that's been collected that's not explainable due to conventional astronomical, weather, or man-made explanations or events or objects. I'm now calling it pseudoscience. It's fringe science. People were mistaken. Pilots have poor vision. Military pilots especially. And I've heard that from Leonard David, who's a aerospace engineering, aviation, space exploration writer. And people like him have said that our military pilots, especially the ones at the USS Nimitz, during its encounter of the Tic Tac UAP back in November 2004, Oh yes, those pilots have poor vision. They're flying, what, $20 million fighter aircraft? And they have poor vision. How did they get through the naval aviation program in Top Gun school with poor vision?
Dr. Davis, could you elaborate a little bit on your, again, to the degree that you're comfortable?
Oh, I can be with it. So it was a transformative issue for me, or a job. It transformed my worldview. It opened up my worldview to a lot more possibilities than what I was used to thinking as a trained PhD physicist. I earned my doctorate in astrophysics at the University of Arizona in '99. And so I worked on 3 space missions in graduate school. The IRAS, which is the Infrared Astronomical Satellite program, and the 2 Voyager missions to the outer planets. So, as pertaining to the topic that Lou wants me to talk about, I'm not trying to avoid it. It is a sensitive subject. It's due to astronaut Ed Mitchell, Dr. Ed Mitchell, Captain USN retired. Because of him, and I won't go into a long story, but it's because of him that I got on the trail of looking for the so-called legend within the UFO community. The retrieval of crashed or landed UAP craft, or UFO craft, as they were known back in those days. And by the way, UAP, the term unidentified aerial phenomenon, goes back to the 1940s even. So I followed this trail, and I ended up, over the course of the following 2.5 decades, working for Bigelow, working for the Air Force Research Lab, working for Halpinoff at Urtech International Incorporated, and then working at the Aerospace Corporation. So we're working in a combination of industry and classified programs that we were contracted to do on behalf of for the Defense Intelligence Agency and for the Pentagon agencies that Lou worked at, and the UAP task force that Jay Stratton led at the Office of Naval Intelligence. And so, a long story short is that I came into contact with industry leaders, technical scientists, both active duty and later retired, as well as intelligence officers, generals, admirals, colonels, people who directed intelligence or human intelligence collection and analysis directorates at the DIA and the Central Intelligence Agency, who reached out to me to have me do some foreign UAP intelligence analysis and assessment. And so I have been exposed to so much in the classified realm that I can tell you definitively that there is a there there. The human race, basically the world's biggest governments, like the United States, our adversary China and Russia, at least as far as I know, have had the occasion to recover craft that have either landed or crashed or both in their territory or even outside of their territories, and have taken those back to the most sensitive of their programs that they've ever had. These programs are even more sensitive and more well hidden than Manhattan Project was, or the modern nuclear weapons industry and the U.S. military and the Department of Energy programs to maintain and upgrade and modernize our nuclear weapons arsenal. And so this is one of the most well hidden programs. It is hidden from congressional oversight and always has been. And it was hidden by the action of President Eisenhower, who instituted presidential emergency action directives during his administration. These directives are not shared with Congress. They are classified. And when the Freedom of Information Act was instituted in the 70s, those are not subjected to the Freedom of Information Act request. These directives provide cover for actions that are associated with the retrieval of these vehicles and the scientific and engineering study of them. And that takes place within the industry. What happens is the Department of Defense offices, CIA offices, they create shell companies. They give a sole source contract to the shell company, who passes the money to a selected group of defense industry firms. And those firms will take that contract money and turn them around and use that as internal funding. It's called internal research and development funds, which they give to their own people inside their company, their own employees, to do the reverse engineering and analysis and study of these recovered vehicles. And so this avoids all congressional oversight. It avoids the game baiting. And it's one of the most clever techniques used to hide it. And as far as I know, only one 4-star general and one 3-star admiral were able to locate these programs. And that's about as much as I can say. They located the programs and they uncovered them. One got a lot of resistance and hostile reception and was told that he found who he was looking for. They were who they were suspected of being. Yes, they were a UFO, UAP, crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. The other one had a lot more political power behind him because of his stature as a 4-star general. And he was able to get into the program and use his authority and his access. I think they call that a super user. The super user has access to all. It's way better all specialized access programs. So he had his capability to be able to look into that whole thing. I was fortunate to meet Dave Dresch at the behest of Jay Stratton. Dave was a NRO liaison officer to the UAP task force, and Dave was working for his boss at the NRO, which was situated in the second floor skiffs of the Aerospace Corporation building, Colorado Springs. And I was assigned to work at the Aerospace Corporation facility in Huntsville, Alabama, because I was supporting NASA's Space Nuclear Propulsion Program office. So Jay put Dave and Dave's boss and I together, and I briefed them for 2.5 days, just the week before COVID struck. And Dave took all of my classified and proprietary information of all the investigations I did at NIDS, AFRO, and working for Help Cut Off at EarthTech, and he took that data and ran with it. And what you now know, the aftermath of that was his classified whistleblower complaint to the IG of the IC. And so there is a there. We have had this program going on in various guises, various code names. Code names change roughly every 3 years. They often shipped around to the major office and programmatic organizations for presidential administration, maybe every 5 to 10 years in some cases. And so these things are very old. They come in, they've gone, but they're still around. And the comedy that's been involved, I would say, since the beginning in 1944 with the first recovery in Italy, of the U.S. Army's recovery of a craft that crashed in Italy back in 1933. The United States Army, when it invaded Italy and pushed the Third Reich out, they were able to recover that craft and bring it back to Wright Airfield. And all of the crash retrievals that have taken place generally on land have gone to Wright Airfield. The majority of the crash retrievals or recoveries of whatever situation it was take place in the maritime environment. And I'm not sure where that is going. I think they're probably also going to were in those days Wright Airfield. I don't know where they're going today though, because I've only worked on the legacy history of this part of it up until about the early 2010s. And ever since the end of the OSAP and the ATIP, I don't know where those operations are going on these days. So I think that's about it.
Is that it?
If there was a question I would always ask, and I'll just say this really easily. Leslie Keene and Rob Blumenthal asked me this for an interview I gave them in July of 2020 for the New York Times article they published. They interviewed Lou and former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. I think Harry was already retired then, wasn't he? Yeah. Okay, so I said basically my interface with the leadership of the industry, which were a number of individuals, is the following. The craft that have been recovered are not of this earth. They're not made by human hands. They are not from this planet. They are not human. They are an alien technology, whatever the word alien means. Are they extraterrestrial? We don't know. We don't know. What motives do they have? Well, we need anthropologists and social psychologists and philosophers to figure that out because they haven't communicated that to us. You know? So physicists like me and Avi, we cannot answer questions like motive. We just need to take data. We call it measurements and signals intelligence in the intelligence industry.
Well, thank you, Dr. Davis. My recommendation would be at some point here to get you in the classified setting like some of the rest of us have already done that before, and have a frank conversation with some of the representatives who I think would be very interested to hear the other part of that conversation, which I'm aware of and been part of. To this point, we've been discussing about the stuff we see in our skies and possibly space, but the one thing we've neglected are those observations of UAP that are underwater. And this kind of goes to the whole transmedium characteristic that we're seeing that some of these UAP can display, particularly as a former Navy man and member of NOAA. What advice could you offer there?
Thanks, Lou. That's a great question. And in fact, I would advise us to continue what we started in Trump's first administration. And what we did is we got him to sign a presidential memorandum on mapping the U.S. exclusive economic zone. And that directed the establishment of a strategy, a plan, a national strategy, a plan, and a council, an interagency council, to contribute to the effort. And so we did this in 2020, and in the 5 years since, we've been able to go from having 40% of our EEZ map to 50%. And it involves not only using ships with sonar, but also exploring the water column with deep diving remotely operated vehicles, swarms of drones, underwater drones. I used to own 120 in the Navy, and that fleet's grown. And NOAA has a pretty sizable fleet of underwater and surface drones, and they partner with the private sector that has a vast capability as well. So I'd say we really want to expand the work that's already occurring within the government and the private sector, and target it, because most of it is targeted towards ocean science, and that's great. But if we open the aperture a bit and include UAP as a research target, I think we'll learn a lot more about the phenomena as well as the ocean.
The question goes to Dr. Davis. We've had discussions at length in certain settings, in the formal official setting you have been part of, where we talk about exotic material. I think it might be very helpful to the degree you can. Can you please explain what makes exotic material that has been recovered from the U.S. government exotic? What makes it different from atomically and chemically?
It's actually a very simple answer. It's the way it's fabricated. It's the way it's fabricated. That's what makes it exotic. It's not a new element that's never been discovered and placed on the periodic table of elements. No. The materials are in the periodic tables. They're either radioactive isotopes that we already know of, or they're any of the other non-radioactive, non-actinide elements on the table. It's just the combination of the materials is unusual. It could be that you could say that that's exotic, but it's the composition, it's how you built the craft, the materials that form the craft and everything inside the craft. It's quite exotic because one of the company's leadership was a young material scientist when he graduated with his doctorate in material science from one of the universities in Illinois back in 1970. And he was hired by Ben Rich to work with him and a team at Scopeworks. That was the Advanced Projects Development Agency, I think is what Lockheed Aircraft Company called it back in those days. So basically, this is what he was telling me. He's an advanced material scientist, and he said, well, we could use the best diagnostic equipment we had back in those days, which was 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And we could see the elements through mass spectroscopy that compose these structures. But when we look at how they're composed and structured, it's like nothing we've been able to fabricate on Earth. We've never been able to reproduce it on Earth. And we have no extrapolated engineering or physics technology to tell us or inform us on how we could possibly learn how to fabricate this on Earth. So they understood that it's the combination of the elements was very unusual. It's counterintuitive, but it's the way the materials are fabricated. That's what makes it exotic.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, I wanted to ask before this panel's over, I want to pull some threads here. What is your understanding of the physics or the likely propulsion technology? What is your assessment of what the capabilities are and how it's being achieved? And then also, I want to ask about materials and energy as well.
We can only speculate. These things are so far advanced, we can only speculate. The best speculation I can come up with is General Relativity does a great job predicting something like a warp bubble. UAP do exhibit the phenomenon of sublight or less than light speed warp bubbles. However, that becomes a challenge when you talk about UAP that dive into the ocean and climb up out of from under the ocean and up in the air. So work,
So it's not warping space-time.
it's a warp in space-time, yeah, but that's described in Einstein's general theory of relativity.
Yeah.
And so the problem is,
Doesn't gravity warp space-time,
that's right,
right?
Yeah.
So these objects are changing space-time around them.
yeah, they, you have a thin shell of energy, and the type of energy has to be, it would have to be negative energy density, and it would be consistent with the type of energy density that you can create from quantum vacuum. And examples of that are the Casimir cavity that has a little vacuum region that's bound by the two plates of the cavity. There's also squeeze states of light, where that's a laser beam, where you're going to take some part of canonical noise fluctuations from out of that part of the beam you're not interested in and pile it up elsewhere in the phase space, and this is getting really technical. So, so I'll just kind of keep it this way. You're going to take the quantum vacuum fluctuation that we know is quantum noise, or shock noise, and laser beams. You're going to pile it up somewhere else in an area you're not interested in measuring, and you only want to measure the amplitude of that beam. And at that point, when you take the quantum vacuum fluctuations out of that amplitude, that energy density goes negative. And the energy density is the square of the amplitude. So that goes negative. And that's an example of negative energy. The mass of the Earth creates space-time curvature.
If it was, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, so that space-time curvature, which we feel is the force of gravity on the surface of the Earth, drags down quantum vacuum fluctuations of the quantum fields that are out in space near the Earth, in the vicinity of the Earth. And that energy density happens to be negative. And so this is an example of theoretically predicted astronomical sources of negative energy, as well as planetary sources of negative energy. So that's what you would need to build a workload. And that's what you would need to build construct a shell.
Just a brief comment of clarification. We have two pillars of modern physics: quantum mechanics and Einstein's theory of gravity, which is curvature of space-time.
Right.
We don't have a reliable theory that combines
The five theory.
That's right.
quantum gravity. So what we are hearing is speculation. We do not have the knowledge to figure out if you can create curvature of space-time out of negative energy density, because we have never mastered this technology. We don't have an understanding of that. So it's possible that, a millennium from now, we'll have those quantum gravity engineers. That's possible. Currently, we're just like too primitive technologically to figure it out. The question is there something in possession of government that the scientists should look into? And, I would love to help government figure it out, because it may guide us about the theory of quantum gravity if we have something.
Yeah. So we have good ideas about these things, and we can speculate on what the best approach to take to go to work level, or the shell of negative energy that will create a transform, which will be a shortcut for space-time between two distant points. But we have craft in our possession. There are no physicists currently working in those programs. So basically mechanical, aerodynamics, aerospace, thermal control engineers, electrical engineers, and material scientists. And material science is a part of engineering often. Usually kind of overlaps chemistry as well. And they've never had a physicist like him or I. They've never had an applied physicist or an experimental physicist. And so they are really lacking in the ability to understand how these things flow.
Sir, the legacy program has been very insulated and insular, so unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of outside involvement because it is so highly classified, and that's been some of the frustration and I think challenges, technologically speaking, because we haven't been able to recently apply new talent, new ideas, new theories to what may be, what the U.S. government may be in possession of.
What about the energy potential?
The energy is a question of how
Some of things we're seeing, right?
Yeah, I haven't been able to access that.
Dr. Davis, can you talk for a moment, about the Nimitz incident, the calculations for the object to go from 80,000 feet within less than a second, 50 feet over the water? What type of energy requirement are we talking about?
Hundreds of times the total electrical energy produced in the United States annually. That's the kind of energy that is representative of the observed features and performances of UAP craft, especially the Tic Tac that the Nimitz encountered in November of 2004. And so it's hundreds and hundreds of times what the United States produces annually, less than amount. And so that compares really well with interstellar spacecraft that would travel relativistic or ultra-relativistic being anywhere from 90 to 99% of the speed of light. The energy just is astronomically huge. So these craft, I don't have the security clearances I need to know to get access to the technical details, but I am made to understand that the craft are consistent in size with the Tic Tac, even double in size of the Tic Tac. That would be up to about 100 feet long by 50 feet diameter of that type. Boomerang-shaped craft, arrow-shaped craft, triangle-shaped craft, and so forth. The biggest ones that have been observed, especially that we investigated at UNS in 1999, involving Sky Air Force Base. That one was a 600-foot long craft, and it was about roughly 100 feet tall. And so they don't have possession of craft like that. I've never been told that. It's usually the more manned scale.
So they couldn't move.
Yeah.
So we might know it.
Yeah, so we can only speculate. I know Jim Caskey wrote in his book, I don't remember the title of it, but anyway, it was cooperating with Colin Kelleher, who I worked with at NIDS, and George Knapp of KLAS TV in Las Vegas. And so Jim mentioned, and Jim was the program manager for the AAS, the OSSAM, the AAS WAP, I think it was. And so basically he described in his book, and they couldn't recognize any propulsion or power devices or systems inside the craft. It was completely unusual. Travis Taylor and I have speculated that possibly they're teleporting energy from a remote distant location where the energy is produced and is teleported to the craft. And that's how the craft can move around without having to carry propellant or rocket engine or an advanced warp drive engine on it. That's one possibility that we speculated on.
On the material, so what you have me thinking is carbon can take multiple forms, right? And are you saying that is the same with other material, other elements? The way in which what we found is different forms of these elements that
I was informed that there would be combinations of elements from the periodic table, combinations of their isotopes. So you have a variety of elements as they naturally occur, or some isotopes of them mixed together in a certain way, and then they're structurally built in a very unusual way that even today we have no equivalent or analog to them. So this is about as much as I was given information at an SCI level.
And do you have or can you comment on whatever species have been piloting these craft? How are they large? Are they multiple species? Are they like what was their size and how many are usually on a craft?
They're typically the multiple species people dealing with the Greys, the Nordics. People are talking about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian or insectoid, it's that they resemble to the recipient of reptile or an insect type humanoid, because they have this a head and 4 limbs and torso. So
Large, small,
human size, human scale.
and are there how many are a crew?
Well, the Greys I'm familiar with from investigating the crash at Bologna, which is misnamed the crash at Roswell. It's not the crash at Roswell, it's the crash at Bologna, Mexico. Those were Greys, those were 4 foot tall. And the Nordics are typically human sized, probably, I'm from 5'6" feet tall. And same with the people who mislabel reptilian and insectoid, they're roughly that height too. I haven't heard anything about anything 7 or 8 feet or 9 feet tall.
What do you think UFOs are? Do you actually think it's a technology, or do you think there are elements that are etheric? Because we hear, I think without question, there is this sort of parapsychological component or paranormal aspect to UFOs that we don't have a means to explain.
Your speculation is as good as mine, Rhys. I mean, I honestly, anything I say is totally speculative based on source data. I don't know for sure. What I can tell you is that people who work on this technology tell me it has no control systems, no control surfaces, no visible propulsion system, no dials, no levers, no buttons. It's a shell. They tell me it's operated by consciousness. Go figure. So, are these genuine technology? Well, yes, in the sense that they're some kind of constructed object, craft. But are they technology as you and I understand it? I don't know. If we're involved, as I know we are, in summoning, and I mean, Jake Barber's effectively admitted this, that he and his team on the range were involved in summoning non-human craft. And it's clear, the implication is that microwave pulse weapons, high-beam microwave pulse weapons, were being used to down these craft. So whatever they are, we've acted offensively against a highly advanced non-human intelligence on behalf of the human race.
Our first contact is essentially engaging with war.
Yeah. So, thanks very much, America. Whoever you are in the program that made these decisions to engage with these HPM weapons, you've made it very clear your position. And the interesting thing is, was the emotion that Jake was feeling after he was retrieving that craft, was that his emotion? Or was it the emotion of the entity inside the craft or attached to that craft, feeling a great sense of despondency and disappointment that this is how these primitive apes respond when they try and engage with us humans?